Hi, this is James Eng with Old Capital, and today I'm here with Mauricio Rauld to talk about a little bit about syndication and raising equity. I think is a big topic nowadays, and so I always like to start off with a little bit of a different question on my intro. So, Mauricio, how would you explain sort of what you do to your kids? So I see some pictures in the background of you've got some young kids. How do you explain to them what you do?
Well, yeah. Well, the reason I'm laughing, my kids are pretty young, right? My kids are 3 and 5, and so the level I get with them is, as far as they're concerned, I make coins, right? And I make coins so that we can go buy birthday presents for their birthday party.
Okay.
And so anytime I got to go to work, it's like I got to go make coins, and they're all happy because they know it's going to be translated into birthday presents. So
Perfect.
that's kind of where it is. But I know where you're going. Obviously, what exactly I do, and the easiest way I can explain it, and I would explain to my kids when they get a little bit older, is I basically keep people out of jail. I just make sure that they raise money legally, right? That they're fully compliant with federal and state securities laws. Obviously, I wouldn't say that to my kids, but that's basically what I do. I just make sure that when you're raising the money, you're doing it legally, you're fully complying with the laws, and we try and keep you away from being Bernie Madoff's cellmate.
So when you say raising money, is that specifically for commercial real estate? Is it for transact businesses, or is it multifamily? What are most of the transactions you're working on today?
Great question. 100% of my practice is, I shouldn't say a practice, 100% of my clients are real estate investors. The reason I don't see 100% of my practice is because I've had a couple of real estate investors do some wacky cryptocurrency funds and some stock market options things, but 99% of it is real estate deals. Most of them are multifamily. Probably 75% of that is multifamily commercial. But I do mobile home parks. I do self-storage. I do ATM machines, which is kind of real estate. So we do single family portfolios, kind of everything. But primarily, it's going to be it's the multifamily, which I think is what kind of the hot topic is these days.
So I have this challenge as sort of a mortgage broker as well, is they look at me and they say, all right, what makes you different than the other bank A, B, C, D? There's going to be multiple syndication attorneys at our
Yeah.
conference. Like, what would you say makes you different in the space?
Yeah, I'm so different. They actually call me the anti-lawyer. So I'm not actually your typical attorney, as you can probably tell already. One of my gifts, and I've just kind of accepted it. One of the things I do well, my secret sauce, my unique ability, whatever you want to call it, is taking complex matters, complex legal matters, and making them really easy to understand. In fact, my good friend Tom Wheelwright, one of the Rich Dad advisors, likes to say that I'm one of the few attorneys that actually speaks English. So I like to educate. I lead with value. And when I'm on a call with a client or even a prospect that I may not even get as a client, I'm always trying to educate them and making them understand the securities laws can be pretty bland and complex and kind of confusing. I just try to encapsulate it and make it super easy to understand. So at least when you walk away, everything's not going over your head. You kind of get an idea of what you're dealing with. That way, when you're having a conversation with your attorney, you can have an intelligent conversation and not be like everything going over your head and I have no idea what you're talking about.
So do people hire you specifically for, let's say I get a deal under contract, now I'm going to go raise, $1 million or $2 million. They reach out to you, and do you do all the paperwork in terms of 506B, 506C, all that type of stuff?
We do it all.
Okay.
Most clients reach out to us at the LOI stage,
Okay.
but honestly, these days I do so much more. So, for example, in terms of like maybe even differentiating myself from the other attorneys, I do website reviews, for example, to make sure they're compliant. I do social media reviews. I'm an asset protection attorney as well, so I don't do that for the general public, but for my syndication clients, I do asset protection reviews. So there's a lot of things that people want. I've just found out over time that they want even before they get to the LOI stage. So I sometimes help clients even ahead of time, but most of the time, LOI comes in, they've got a property, and they hire me to make sure, I underwrite their deal. I just make sure I go through their business plan really thoroughly, because that's the only way I know how to pull out all of the risks involved in their particular deal, so I know what to put in the paperwork. Everybody talks about the paperwork, and that's important, obviously, but more importantly is making sure the right things are in the paperwork, because
Sure.
your goal is not the paperwork. Your goal is to be in full compliance with federal and state securities laws. It does you no good to have a bunch of papers that people have signed if they're not solid, and if something happens and they get reviewed and they get challenged, they don't help you, right? So what you want is compliance, not necessarily a bunch of documents.
So, I mean, you see a lot of syndicators, and then you also see a lot of PPMs. What, I don't know, what mistakes have you seen syndicators maybe make, either blatantly, like they know the rules, but they don't follow them, or maybe they got advice that isn't the best advice? Is there anything like that that you've seen in the market, let's say in the last 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, so three things pop into my mind every time we talk about biggest mistakes. Number one is people not realizing they're even selling securities, which is what we're doing, right?
Okay.
They're buying real estate. They're like, why is the SEC even involved in my business, right? I'm just buying real estate. So people don't understand that when they're raising money, they have to comply with the security laws. I see a lot of people just going out there and raising money and putting together an operating agreement that their business lawyer put together and pick up money and they're done. And they're like, no, you didn't do any of the compliance work. You didn't give the disclosures. You completely violated securities law. So that's number one. And most of those, I say most, maybe half of those are people who just don't know any better, right? I just didn't know that these apply. The other half are people who do know better, but they try and get fancy and like, well, I'm going to structure it in some unique way to get around the securities laws. Like I'll set up a TIC arrangement, a tenant in common arrangement, or I'll do a profit sharing agreement, or I'll do, whatever, a wink, hand, whatever, right? And the bottom line, it doesn't matter. The structure, the way you put it together does not matter. As I like to say, anytime you're taking money from someone where the returns are generated by your efforts, in other words, your investors are passive and you're active, you are issuing and dealing with securities, and you've got to go through the whole compliance. So that's probably the number one. Okay. The second one I'm seeing a lot, and it's recent, and we were talking before we got on, I'm starting to call this almost like an epidemic. People trying to raise money for other people. People coming in and, people are raising money. It's getting harder and harder to raise money. And so people run out of their own network, their own cash. So they bring somebody else in. They bring in kind of a capital raiser to take care of the capital part. And what people forget or don't know is that you cannot compensate people for raising money for you unless they are an SEC licensed broker dealer, right? So most of the time, well, not most of, a lot of the times I'm seeing people actually do what we call transaction-based compensation, which if you're doing that, conversation's over, you are done, you can go home. Which is, hey, you raise $1 million, I'll give you 5% of the GP. You raise $2 million, I'll give you 10%. Like that kind of transaction-based, that is a hallmark sign of acting like a broker dealer, and both the syndicator will be in violation of the rules because they're not going to disclose that, and the person raising the money is obviously practicing without a license, so they've got consequences as well. So that's probably the biggest thing. In the old days, and I kind of joke in the old days probably means like 3 or 4 years ago, most syndicators were single syndicators. There were one person raising the capital. Maybe they had a business partner. Maybe you and I, James, got together and we raised money because between the two of us, we can probably divide all the work. Rarely did I see 3 people, because now you're splitting everything 3 ways. Do you really need a third person like to do the actual work? Probably not. Today I'm seeing 5, 6, 7 sponsors in there. Sure. And I know that the only reason they're in there is because they have a group of people, a network, an email list that they can raise money, and their sole reason for being in the deal is to bring in the capital. Right. And then what happens, of course, is they're trying to mask that, right? They're trying to structure it and say this and say that. And like, well, what if they do this? What if they do that? And they're trying to add more, responsibilities to this person so that it doesn't look too obvious that they're really just raising the money and not really doing the work. Sure. So that's probably the second biggest thing I'm seeing right now. And then the third thing I'm seeing quite a lot is people on social media basically blowing their exemptions. We didn't get into it, but the biggest exemption most people rely on if you do syndication is a 506B as in boy. Right. The gist of that is you cannot advertise. You can only basically do friends and family, people that you have pre-existing substantive relationships with, which is a whole other topic, cannot advertise. But people are on Facebook not realizing, the main thing they're not realizing is advertising, like everything else with the SEC, is really broadly defined. It's not just talking about your specific deal. Clearly, if you're on Facebook saying, hey, I'm raising $1 million, call me. Clearly, I think everybody gets that.
That's a violation.
Right.
That's a violation.
There's something else called conditioning the market, which is a much more broader and wishy-washy and not really easily definable. But conditioning the market is anything that you would post that drums up interest and excitement about your deal, even if you don't specifically mention your deal. So when you're in due diligence and you're posting something about, hey, we're at the property and we're doing this due diligence and we got this, basically, hey, by the way, this is the property.
This is coming down the pipeline.
Yeah. Coming down the pipeline, and our investors are going to make a killing because this is going to be a 10% return on investment, blah blah blah. That's going to be conditioning the market. If you're in a podcast talking about how awesome you are and how you get 10% returns consistently, all that kind of stuff is and again, same thing with the problem that you have with the first thing we talked about, which is the paying people to raise money.
Right.
People try and get around it, right? They kind of try and massage things. But think about this, James. What people you'll probably see is if you look at the whole timeline, you'll see somebody not posting at all on Facebook or posting once a month or once a quarter. And then suddenly, lo and behold, 2 weeks before the offering, you see a spike activity, right? And hey, and no, I'm not conditioning the market. I'm just,
right.
Suddenly there's a spike. Then they close and then the activity goes back down. So when a securities regulator is looking at this, you're just gonna have a really hard time. So that's a whole new discussion. We can definitely talk about that, but that's probably the third biggest mistake I'm seeing these days is the advertising. So not realizing you have a security, paying people illegally to raise money for you. And then the third thing is using social media. And by the way, your website too. Your website is public. Right? People forget that. So anything you put on your website is being blasted to the world. So the exact same rules that apply to social media apply to your website, which is why we do a website review for all of our clients to make sure that they're SEC compliant.
So we're going to have you at our conference in October 24th and 25th. And you're going to be talking about all this stuff, but especially around people raising money for you, and whether you're doing it for people or you're having people do it for you. There's a lot of rules and regulations around that to make sure we go back to point number one is we keep you out of jail. And so
right. I always feel bad because I'm always kind of the wet blanket. I'm always telling you people, what not to do, or, what they're doing things wrong. So I really want to focus mostly on what you can do and how do you legally accept money from other money raisers? How do you legally compensate people to raise money? I'm a big believer that if you want better answers, you just got to ask better questions. You want world-class answers, you need to ask world-class questions. And so I'm always looking at how to do things. How do you do this? Not you cannot do this, you cannot do that. How do you something? And that's how my brain works, and that's why I'm always looking for solutions after I've identified the problem.
That is perfect. How can people reach out to you if they've got sort of an immediate need or something, a question? What's the best way for people to reach out to you now?
Yeah, two ways. Probably my website, premierlawgroup.net. There's a way to contact us, a little questionnaire that gets us to me. If you want to email me directly, it's team, @premierlawgroup.net. And then I've got a YouTube channel that you can just Google my name or YouTube my name, and I'm starting to add there. So I put a lot of content out there. And obviously most people probably know me from Facebook. I'm pretty active in dropping. And again, I just like to add value. So I drop a lot of videos there. So if you want to follow me on Facebook, just Mauricio Rauld, that would be awesome.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Mauricio.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.